What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back here on Road Graders, coming to you on a very somber loss Monday. We are going to be diving into the state of the Baltimore Ravens. It is absolutely crazy to me to be doing this in week four. But what we have seen the last 2 weeks, what we've seen through 4 weeks, quite frankly, is absolutely cause to ring the concern bell. So we're going to dive into it. If you guys are looking forward to this breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe if you're new here. I know a lot of people aren't going to be taking in Ravens content. I get into the film. I'll be doing that later this week. Just not today. I don't really, I want to take some time to kind of process what I'm seeing. And, the Ravens didn't put in a lot of effort, so I don't really see the point in putting in a lot of effort. But as always, this video is brought to you by our friends at Profit X. We'll be diving into what they can bring you here in a minute. So I want to start with this came from an article from Gianna of the Baltimore Banner, and I'll just put it up on the screen here because I want to start with what I think the fundamental issue of this team is. And so she tweeted, Pro Bowl safety Kyle Hamilton spoke at the podium after the game, and he handled it with aplomb. But the other leaders of the defense denied interviews or were gone and or injured. They left players such as Tavius Robinson, depth lineman John Jenkins, and rookies Malachi Starks and Keon Martin to answer questions. Now, you can look at this and say guys like Roquan, guys like Marlon left the game injured. Obviously, Matabike is injured. The problem is if you go back through the transcripts from the last several big losses the Ravens had, including in the playoffs, Roquan Smith doesn't speak. He's usually the first one out of the building, and multiple reporters have told me that. You don't see, a lot from Marlon Humphrey, other than him just kind of somberly talking. That he talked after the Lions game. He didn't really say a whole lot. The fundamental thing that this team has wrong with them is they have a significant lack of leadership. There is no veterans in this room, and I am a big believer that your leader or your actions are dictated by your leadership, and it all starts at the top. John Harbaugh was sold to us as, the CEO coach that got the most out of his players. And for the better part of 18 years, he did do that. And the reason I am so concerned and the reason I'm coming at John Harbaugh so hard is because go through some of the big losses over the last few years. Obviously, a lot of them being in the playoffs. But even if you go back to something like the 2019 Browns game in week 2 or week 3, whatever it was, they always bounce back in a big way. The Ravens had this streak of not losing back-to-back games. They also had a streak of, not losing in prime time where they had like a great record. So John Harbaugh has always done a good job of getting this team up for big games, especially in the context of, if the week before goes really poorly, they're usually bouncing back the next week. The Ravens got embarrassed, quite frankly, on Monday Night Football. They got beat up in the trenches. They got bullied by a Detroit Lions team. This is the exact moment where John Harbaugh's strength, being the motivator, the CEO coach, should be shining the most. And it absolutely did not. This team looked disinterested in playing football. They look like there's absolutely no leadership. And we're going to get into some of the specifics here in a minute, because that's one thing that I made this clear. If you follow me on Twitter last night, trying to blame one thing doesn't work. It's not just John Harbaugh. It's not just Todd Monken. It's not just Lamar Jackson. This team's fundamental issues, there's so many. They have a flawed build. So some of that falls, or not some of that falls on Eric DaCosta. They don't seem to be buying into their head coach. That falls on John Harbaugh. Their quarterback had a very bad game against Spagnuolo again, who has just, like, Lamar really struggles against Spags. He knows how to get after him. The offensive line struggled. They struggled to, 2 weeks in a row, they're keeping in 6-7 man protections and still getting to the quarterback. So it's just one of those things where it stacks. Zach Orr has struggled. And again, the players don't seem to be responding very well to Zach Orr. They'll line up with a 7-man pressure. They'll bring 7, and still no one's able to get to the quarterback. No one looks like they're timing the snap right. Everybody looks like they're playing slow. This is all a reflection of the coaching. We're going to dive into some of the specifics. Before we do, this video is brought to you by our friends at Profit X. lines for Monday Night Football are currently out, ready to go. I'm going to be absolutely hammering that Garrett Wilson anytime touchdown. Join me, go over there, put in promo code ROADGraders. You'll get up to $200 in ProfitX cash back. Thank you to ProfitX for sponsoring. So starting on the offensive side of the ball, 2 weeks in a row, Todd Monken hasn't had a game plan or I shouldn't say a game plan. Todd Monken hasn't had adjustments to the defensive game plan that he's faced. So last week, it was keeping in 6-7 man protections against, I wouldn't even say a blitz, because they would bring a 5-man pressure, but one of them was spying. And essentially the whole game plan was for the edges to bend in the back of the pocket. As Lamar would step up into the pocket, you would have the spy break on Lamar and chase him down. They did that over and over again. He tried to adjust with extra guys in to protect, but then you'd have 3 routes going deep down the field. So there's nowhere to get the ball out quick once that happens. Now, obviously, some of that falls on the offensive line. Another huge issue this team is having. This offensive line is struggling to gel, whether it be in the run game. And it's funny. We've had 2 big runs on in the first quarter, in the first series. Derrick Henry had that 12-yard run yesterday that was blocked up perfectly. You go back to the week before against the Lions, Derrick Henry scores on that power play. Roger Rosengard and Daniel Falele make big plays. After the first drive, they can't move anybody in the run game. They can't pick up a blitz. The slide protections look off. We're going to do that. We're going to do some film on that this week because it seems to be a huge issue. The offensive line is struggling. Lamar doesn't trust his line, and that's going back over 3 weeks now. The Bills didn't get a ton of pressure on him, but the Cleveland Browns did, the Detroit Lions did, and now Kansas City did. Now, this is where you get into the Lamar conversation. This has always been a tricky conversation because, you talk about Lamar Jackson having a bad game, and then everybody throws out all the factors, completely acknowledging all these other factors do exist. But Lamar Jackson did not have a good game in this football game. Ran into a sack. He also doesn't look himself. He looks like he might be hurt. When he's escaping, running away, which is a huge issue, because this is why I don't think this offensive line has gotten a lot of heat in recent years, because the pass protection hasn't been as high level as a lot of other teams, but yet they're usually ranked, and that's because Lamar Jackson elevates his offensive line. He's able to escape sacks. They always throw the stat up where it's like, they only allowed 3 sacks over the last 10 weeks last year. Looking at the sacks, I think, is always a little bit of a struggle, just because Lamar can escape them. You really need to look at pressure rate. You need to look at other things, because you can still have a pressure. Lamar can escape it, sure, but that pressure was still caused by your offensive line. So all that to say, when Lamar Jackson stops trusting his offensive line, he starts to act, frantic. And that's what we saw yesterday. The way he faded and threw that ball up to Mark Andrews, which Mark Andrews didn't have any fight on that ball at all, which was a huge issue. He kind of got mossed by Leo Chanel. But still not a good throw to kind of lean back, fade. It was very much not Lamar Jackson because he's so good at protecting the football. He has the fumble, later in the game. So the other thing Lamar did very poorly was getting up to the line of scrimmage and commanding his offense. They had 2 delay of game penalties. There was 7-8 seconds left, and he was trying to make a call. You're on the road. You're in a silent count. You can't be audibling at the line of scrimmage. So there's a lot of things that fall at Lamar Jackson's feet. Absolutely. But he's just one of the factors that seems to be why this team is struggling so much. You switch over to the defensive side of the ball. It's a mess. It's a complete mess. Zach Orr doesn't have these guys ready to go. There was a 3rd down early in that game where nobody knew the play call. Everybody's running around, and they took Smith, the running back Smith, out of the backfield, completely uncovered, goes for a 1st down. There's just so many issues. And then you get into the defensive players. Marlon Humphrey got absolutely bullied before he left with an injury, missed tackle. He had that face mask penalty on with it he didn't need to do. Got absolutely, bodied by Xavier Worthy. Numerous plays that weren't even made by the receiver, but Marlon was beat on them. So Marlon's just getting absolutely roasted out there. Roquan Smith looks lost again, not physical enough. These linebackers aren't physical enough. It's hard to look at the defensive line and say a whole lot because they are so depleted. They're missing Nnamdi Madubuike. They're missing Travis Jones. I'm not going to sit here and shit on guys like CJ Okoye, Brent Urban, guys that are, rotational guys that are being forced to start. But the trenches in general, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they're just not able to get it done. And they put a lot of money into the secondary, a lot of investment into the secondary. You got a first round pick. You got the highest paid safety at your safety combination. You spent a first round pick last year on Nate Wiggins, who I think Wiggins played pretty well. So I'm not going to shit on Nate Wiggins. But you got a lot of money going into Marlon Humphrey. You bring in Awuzie, you bring in Jair Alexander. You've got all these names. You got all these guys in your secondary, and they're still the 32nd ranked defense. That is a fundamental issue. Then you get into the pass rush. The pass rush, to me, is the result of draft failures. So looking at Twitter last night, everybody's all over Mike Green. Mike Green has not had a good start to his career. 4 games in, he doesn't look like the explosive pass rusher that we saw in the preseason. Doesn't look like the explosive pass rusher we saw in film, coming out of Marshall. But relying on a rookie to be your savior in the pass rush game, probably not a good strategy. The reason there's a lack of pass rushers is from years of draft misses. Where's Adisa Isaac? Where's David Ajabo? Where's Odafe Owe? All these first and second round picks you've put into, and third for Isaac, all these early draft picks you've put into your pass rushers aren't playing up to that standard. They aren't, developing into these guys that are supposed to be, getting after the quarterback. Nnamdi Madubuike was the only one able to do that, and it looks like he's probably out for the year with a neck injury. Travis Jones, he's a nose tackle. He has a place. He's going to get some pressure on first down. He's going to be able to stop the run, but that can't be the result of your pass rush game. You need, like last week we were talking about, okay, we just need Mike Green and Anise Peebles to step up. Like in their rookie year against the Detroit Lions, a very powerful offense, you're expecting your rookies to step up and be the answer. That's a fundamental problem, and that's years of draft misses from Eric DeCosta. So all that to say, there's so many issues with this team. The state of the Ravens, I've been following the Ravens my whole life. I've been following them in depth for the last 10 years. I have never seen them in back-to-back games look that disinterested in playing football. You have the London Jags game. You have, there's been so many blips throughout the last, 2 decades where, of course, they're going to have bad games. I'm not foolish to think that doesn't happen. But to have it happen 2 weeks in a row where the team just doesn't look like they care, that's a fundamental issue that I just don't know how you fix. And again, I think all of that falls at the feet of John Harbaugh. He is supposed to be his greatest asset was being the motivator, being the guy that the team shows up for. If that's not happening, how can you sit there and say he hasn't lost the room? Again, there's other problems with this team. This isn't a one thing, but someone said it really well one day. They said, you can't fire the players. So if you're looking for that culture change, admittedly, the players need to be part of it. Absolutely. But where else do you go? And that's where I think the Ravens are going to be stuck in the mud this year, unless something drastically changes, unless that early bye week helps. Because, they got the Texans this week, but then they have the Rams, and the Rams are playing good football right now. So they could be going into the bye 2-4, 1-5. I do think they beat the Texans this week, but there's fundamental problems with this football team that go far beyond one or two things. It gets into 8, 9 things. So that's what I wanted to go through today. Hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. Hope I didn't ruin your Monday. Do me a favor, hit that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here. We'll be bringing out some film content this week, trying to get ready for the Texans, try and get back on track. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace out, everyone.